Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through complex sources to get you up to speed fast.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're diving into, well, one of the biggest questions out there. Is there a creator in a universe increasingly mapped out by science?
It's a huge question, and it got particularly intense with thinkers like Richard Dawkins. His book, The God Delusion, really pushed this into the mainstream. He presented a pretty stark challenge.
Yeah, a really powerful one. Our sources dig into his core idea. Darwinian evolution explains life's complexity fully.
Exactly. So for Dawkins, that means a supernatural designer isn't just, redundant.
But actually improbable. Like, why look for God when evolution does the job? That's the vibe, right?
Pretty much. And he builds on that. He has specific arguments against the whole God hypothesis.
Like the ultimate Boeing 747 one. That's probably his most famous.
That's the one. The idea is if something complex like life needs a designer,
Then the designer must be even more complex.
right. And so who designed the designer? You get this endless loop, this infinite regress.
So his point is, if God is complex, God needs explaining too. It doesn't solve the problem, it just kicks it up a level. God can't be simple in the way some theologians mean it.
Precisely. If God isn't fundamentally simple, like uncaused and not made of parts, then the chain just keeps going. That's a major logical hurdle for him.
Okay. And then there's the God of the gaps critique.
Ah, yes. The idea that people used God to explain things science hadn't figured out yet.
Like lightning or where life came from, maybe even diseases.
Exactly. And Dawkins points out, quite rightly in many cases, that as science learns more,
Those gaps get smaller. We understand germ theory, so we don't need divine wrath to explain sickness anymore.
And his argument is that this shrinking space makes God vulnerable. If God only lives in the gaps, what happens when science fills them all? Does God just disappear?
It paints God as constantly retreating.
Yeah, a receding pocket of ignorance, basically.
What about miracles? Things like, say, the virgin birth.
For Dawkins, those aren't really supernatural. They're just scientific questions we haven't answered yet.
Meaning, if we had enough data, we could test them. See if they break known laws or maybe find a hidden natural explanation.
That's his take. They're unsolved puzzles, not divine fingerprints. It's a very thorough, naturalistic view, trying to explain everything within that framework.
Okay, so that's the challenge. Powerful stuff. But you mentioned a counter-response.
Yes, and that's our focus today. We're drawing heavily from Mohammad Abu AbdurRahman's work, A Taymiyyan Response to New Atheism.
Taymiyyan from Ibn Taymiyyah.
The very same, an ancient scholar, but his ideas, as presented here, offer a really coherent way to address Dawkins, even on things like divine intervention, in a way that might actually be scientifically consistent.
Okay, I'm intrigued. A scientifically consistent view of divine intervention. Let's unpack this Taymiyyan response. The source says it's a third, highly intuitive option, avoiding the usual traps Dawkins points out. What's different about Ibn Taymiyyah's concept of God?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Ibn Taymiyyah describes God as, get this, both spatial and indivisible.
Spatial, like having a location. Isn't that unusual? Many theologians say God is non-spatial, right?
Yeah.
Beyond space.
Exactly. That's a common view. But Taymiyyah suggests God is spatially distinct from creation, not spread thinly everywhere, but separate. However, and this is crucial, God is also indivisible.
Indivisible, meaning not made of parts.
Precisely. Not composed of separate bits and pieces that would themselves need explaining or assembling. This allows God to be real, distinct, even spatial in a sense, but without being complex in the way Dawkins means the kind of complexity that implies being built from other things.
Ah, okay. So God is real, distinct, but a fundamental unity. How does that counter Dawkins' complexity argument, the Boeing 747 thing?
Well, Ibn Taymiyyah wouldn't say God is simple like some abstract principle. God has attributes, acts, real qualities. But, he argues, God isn't like a building which needs bricks and a plan and a builder. Ibn Taymiyyah says God is indivisible and is not composed of separate substances located in distinct spaces. God doesn't have parts in that sense. There's no assembly required for God.
So if God doesn't have contingent parts needing an external cause,
then the infinite regress Dawkins talks about, the who designed the designer question, it just does not follow. It doesn't apply to this kind of being. God's complexity, if you want to call it that, is inherent to his unified, necessary nature, not a result of being constructed.
okay, that makes sense. It sidesteps the regress.
Yeah.
The source uses an analogy.
Yeah, the gingerbread man analogy. It's quite helpful.
Right, a gingerbread man is made in the image of a baker, but obviously not equal to the baker.
Exactly. The baker is the cause, the gingerbread man is the effect.
Yeah.
They aren't comparable in perfection or, fundamental nature.
So God creating us in his image doesn't mean we are parallels. The source says the difference between the necessary cause, God, and contingent effects, us, is infinitely greater.
Infinitely greater. So God, as the uncaused, indivisible cause, doesn't fall into that regress trap. He's the ultimate ground of being, not just another complex thing needing explanation.
Got it. That's the foundation for God's nature. Now, how does this translate into creation? You mentioned creation ex materia. What is that?
Right, ex materia. It literally means creation out of prior material conditions.
Okay, so not ex nihilo from absolutely nothing.
Correct. And also not just rearranging stuff that already exists, like building with Lego bricks. It's something in between.
Bringing new things into being, but from some kind of prior stuff. How does that work?
The Taymiyyan view, as explained here, is that God is always bringing things into existence out of prior conditions which he removes from existence. It's continuous.
Always. So creation isn't just a one-off event.
No, it's ongoing. And crucially, God creates by way of their secondary causes and natural means without breaking any truly universal law.
Wait, without breaking laws. So God works through natural processes.
That's the core idea. It's like God is constantly sculpting reality, transforming prior states into new ones, using the very laws and materials he established. One thing comes from another, which came from another, all sustained by God's continuous creative act.
Okay, but the source says something surprising here. That this model actually increases our sense of dependence on God. How? If everything has a natural cause.
It seems counterintuitive at first, right? But think about it. If God isn't just the initial starter, but the one continuously bringing each moment, each thing into existence from its prior condition,
then everything at every moment relies directly on that ongoing creative act.
Precisely. Every link in the chain of cause and effect, because it's contingent, depends not just on the previous link, but ultimately on the uncaused originator who sustains the whole process. The dependence isn't just historical, it's immediate and constant.
Wow. So the source says the contingency of everything is mutually established, reinforcing itself in its utter dependence on the necessary God. The whole system points back to God constantly.
That's the idea. It makes dependence even more profound.
Okay, so how does this idea, creation ex materia, tackle Dawkins' God of the gaps? If God creates through natural means,
then divine action isn't about plugging holes in our knowledge. It's not reserved for the things we don't understand.
So when science discovers a natural law or process,
that discovery isn't pushing God out. It's actually revealing how God is acting, how God brings things into existence according to the patterns he established.
So the gaps aren't a threat. Understanding the process is understanding God's creative work.
Exactly. It counters the idea that science shrinks God's territory. Instead, science becomes, in a way, the study of God's consistent, lawful way of creating and sustaining the universe. It's God through the observable processes.
That completely reframes the science versus faith debate. It's not either.
Not in this view, no.
Okay, but what about the really big ones? Miracles, like Adam from dust or Jesus' birth. Dawkins sees those as potential lawbreakers, scientific questions. How does ex materia handle those?
That's a critical test, isn't it? And the Taymiyyan framework offers a way to think about them without necessarily invoking violations of universal laws. Take Adam created out of dust.
Okay.
It's not ex nihilo from zero. There's a prior material condition.
Yeah.
Dust. God acts upon this dust, transforming it into Adam.
So the dust is the materia. But it's still a massive transformation, right? Not just sculpting.
Absolutely. The source suggests the prior condition, the dust in its original state, is essentially removed from existence, or completely transformed to become the new substance, Adam. It's a divine act through a material starting point, but an act that fundamentally changes its nature, bringing something radically new into being. God's agency works on and through matter in a unique, originative way.
So it uses material conditions, but the act itself is uniquely divine, transforming those conditions beyond normal processes.
That seems to be the idea. It maintains the principle of working through means, but acknowledges God's power to originate new realities from those means.
And Jesus' creation.
Similarly, described as out of his mother's substance and the breath of the Holy Spirit, Gabriel. Again, you have prior conditions, Mary's substance, the divine command via Gabriel. It's presented as a divine act, using existing created means and conditions transformed by God's specific will and power to bring about Jesus' existence. It's not seen as suspending laws randomly, but as God acting directly within the created order, using its components in a unique, miraculous way consistent with ex materia.
So miracles become specific, powerful instances of God's ongoing ex materia creation, rather than violations of a static system.
That's a good way to put it. They fit within the broader framework of God continuously bringing things into existence from prior conditions, albeit in extraordinary ways.
This has been really clarifying. So to wrap up, the Taymiyyan view, with this idea of God as spatial yet indivisible, and especially creation ex materia.
It offers a framework that doesn't necessarily conflict with science in the way Dawkins suggests. It allows for a creator, even for miracles, within a consistently ordered universe where God acts through natural means and secondary causes.
Sort of integrates God into the fabric of reality, rather than only intervening when the rules break down or our knowledge fails.
Precisely. It avoids the God of the gaps and the infinite regress problems in a pretty coherent way.
So the final thought for you, our listener, is this. If the divine does consistently work through the material world, through its laws and conditions, as this Taymiyyan perspective suggests, what does that really mean for how we see science and how we see faith?
Yeah, does it change what we look for when we study the universe? Does it suggest creation isn't just a past event, but something happening right now, all around us? What new questions does that open up about reality itself? Something to think about.